It's Mark from Top Local. We're here with Bernie Pawlik, Pawlik Automotive in Vancouver, Vancouver's best auto service experience. They're 17-time winners of Best Auto Repair in Vancouver, as voted by their customers. How you doing, Bernie?
I'm doing really well.
So we have a bit of a meaty presentation today. You said a Mercedes 3-liter diesel with a cooler seal leak. What was going on with this vehicle?
Well, there was a few things going on with this vehicle, but the first thing the customer brought it in for was a fairly large oil leak at the bottom of the engine. And we've been servicing this car for a while, so the leak was there in the past, and it's just getting worse and worse. So, basically, there's a large oil leak was the primary concern. It was due for a service, actually, in fact, overdue for service, which I'll talk about later. And the check engine light was on.
So, what did you find with the oil leak?
So the oil leak was coming from the center of the engine, the valley area. So on a V engine, there's two banks of cylinders, one on the left, one on the right, and in between it forms a V. The valley sits in the middle, and this is where they position the engine oil cooler. Oil cooler seal leaks are pretty common on these engines. The actual coolers themselves are pretty much bulletproof unless you destroy your engine, but the oil cooler seals do leak. So very difficult to actually see the leak on this vehicle because there's so many parts and pieces in the way. That the intake manifolds, there's fuel injection pipes, a lot of pieces in the way. But just based on where the oil was leaking from, the oil cooler seals were the cause of the leak. So we basically stripped down the engine, took the intake manifolds off, accessed the oil cooler, and there's also another area of leakage in that area, which is the turbo oil stand, which we looked at the same time. I'm going to share a few photos. So,
sounds like a lot of work to get at the oil cooler.
It is a lot of work. Here's a photo. Are we seeing this? Okay.
Yep.
Perfect. So this is the valley of the V6 diesel engine with the intake manifolds removed. So a lot of parts and pieces have been removed. Many hours of work has gone into what you're looking at in this photo. And there's a lot of interesting things to see. So I've got the colored arrows here. The red arrow points to the engine oil cooler. So you can see a lot of oil and filth around this area, especially heading towards the right side of the picture, which is the back of the engine. The green arrow points to the turbo, where the turbo oil, the turbo stand sits. The stand is the piece that holds the turbocharger in place. And there's oil flowing in and out of the turbocharger through this particular area. Again, that's a source of leakage, and based on the amount of oil around that area, that was probably leaking some oil as well. So the oil cooler, which is the piece the red arrow points to, is removed. We changed the seals, and we put the cooler back in, of course, clean everything up. Now the yellow arrow, and I'm going to talk a little further on as we get going in this hangout, points to the intake manifold ports. You'll see there's a rectangular or square port, and there's a round one. And what the arrows I'm pointing to in this picture is just that amount of black, filthy carbon deposit in those ports. This engine was gucked up pretty badly. That's where this is where the air flows into the engine, so it needs lots of airflow, and it wasn't getting as much airflow as it should have had. So on that note, we'll stop the sharing for the moment and get back to where we were.
So I think you mentioned that there was a check engine light on. Did this repair have any relation, or did that have any relation to the oil leaks?
Well, the check engine light wasn't related to the oil leaks, but fortunately for the customer, the check engine light was on for a couple of trouble codes for the intake valve, the air intake. I'm just actually looking at my notes here. Intake port shutoff position sensor was the codes, and it was for left and right bank. Now what that is, and actually we'll just go right to pictures because this makes, as they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words. This picture is of one of the intake manifolds, and this is the opposite side. Remember that yellow arrow that pointed all that black city stuff? Well, this is the part that bolts onto there, and the red arrows point to the round intake ports. These all have it's called a butterfly valve that opens and closes. The trouble code that was stored in the engine computer was related to this particular system. And again, there's a variety of arrows here, so I'll go through all of them. But the red arrows point to the valves that open and close. The yellow arrow points, that's a linkage rod that connects all three of these pieces together. The purple is the swirl valve motor. This is the motor that actuates the valves when the computer tells it to. And the blue arrow points to a sensor. And now this sensor, when the computer tells the valves to close or open, it goes to a final position. And when that position is reached, then the computer knows, hey, the valves are closed, everything's good. The trouble code is being set because that sensor was not seeing that particular item happen. Now, the motor was actually working fine. It was moving the valves, but what was happening is that there's so much wear in the linkage rods of plastic over the years. The rods had worn so much that the valves weren't all opening and closing at the same rate. So you can actually see in the picture, if you look on the left side, you see the valves actually partially closed. And anyways, the linkage was so badly worn. Now, the only replacement for this is to replace the whole intake manifold. As you can guess, it's expensive. Off the top of my head, I think they're about around $900 a piece. There's 2 of them, so kind of gives you an idea of what this adds to the bill of the job. But after completion, everything's done. And fortunately for the customer, there's no extra labor charge to do this work at the same time, so we had to remove it. This is a picture of the new manifold, so you can see how nice and clean and clear everything is. At the top of the picture is the swirl valve motor. It's a bit of a different view. The linkage rods are on the bottom of the picture here. And actually, this is both manifolds coupled together, but you can see how clean the ports are. A lot more airflow, so the engine will perform. I mean, the engine is going to perform much better after this particular service is done.
So did you find any other issues while you were doing this repair?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because, yes, we did find some other issues. This vehicle came in and it was due, well, actually, I'll disclose a couple of things. So here's the other issue. This is the turbo oil stand pipe, the oil stand. And this is, as I pointed in the earlier picture, you can see where it bolted down to the engine, looked like it was leaking. This is the top where the turbocharger bolts onto the engine. And the red arrow points to the engine oil. This is the high pressure oil line that goes into the turbocharger. So this is feeding oil into the turbocharger, critical for the life of the turbo. The turbo's spinning at 30, 40,000 RPMs at times, maybe even faster. It really needs good, clean oil. If you look in there, it looks pretty gucked up. That's a small hole. It's only about maybe a 1/4 inch in diameter at the most. But this oil hole is so badly plugged, it's surprising that a trickle of oil is getting through. The turbo is working. I think the owner of this vehicle is extremely lucky that he had this service done when he did, because the turbo would have seized up in pretty short order. And just so you know, the hole on the right-hand side, which is quite a bit larger, that is the oil drain back hole. So the oil just drains back into the engine down through that hole. But again, this is this is bad maintenance. And the other issue, this is what was displayed on the dash of this vehicle. Service A exceeded by 11,415 kilometers. So this light has been on for a very, very, very long time. And this isn't the first post I've talked about people who've left their oil and haven't changed it. And it's there in black and white. I mean, Mercedes doesn't make it much easier to be reminded you need to change your oil. It's there every day, and every kilometer you go, it tells you you're gone too far. And really, if you follow that religiously, you're going to have a lot less problems. I just can't say it enough. It just doesn't make any sense. You're saving absolutely nothing by leaving it longer. So get your oil changed. That's the key message to this. I mean, a lot of that guck we see in the intake system may be prevented. Certainly turbocharger failures, we've talked about them on the previous blog post. Complete engine repairs, there's a lot that goes wrong with these. So change your oil. Change your oil. Get the service done regularly.
So it seems to be pretty, like, we've seen a few of these now, and this has been a pretty consistent issue. These diesel motors from Mercedes, or maybe any diesel motor, really must be pretty rigorous. You got to be rigorous about getting your oil changed on time. You can't stretch it very far, even if it's a synthetic.
Absolutely, and this uses synthetic oil. And the oil change intervals in these, I think they're about 15,000 kilometers. That's a good amount of time, if you drive a lot, like huge distances. I mean, that's a couple of times a year. But if you're not a huge driver, it's only probably once a year service. It's not a lot. It is a couple $100, but it's only one service a year, maybe 2. But the cost, of course, the bills for these kind of jobs are enormous when you leave it too long, especially if you wreck the engine. I mean, we had one that was over $20,000. So yeah, it's important to do the service. I mean, on any engine, it's important. Gasoline engines too. I mean, it's more critical now than it ever has been.
So would you say that with all that corrosion that was in those intake ports and everything, I'm sure that part of that's just due to how diesel fuel is burned, but is that more a function of, would a regular oil change have helped with that, or is that more of a function of they needed to have an engine flush, or maybe some of the other services that you guys offer, I'm trying to think of the fuel injector cleaning, etc.
Cleaning services on diesels that can help with that. There are also EGR cleaning services that we can do. But I mean, a lot of it is a function of the design of the engine. All modern diesels have an EGR system, exhaust gas recirculation. It's a critical emission component to reduce NOx emissions, which are really high in a diesel because of the combustion temperature and pressures. So it's an important emission item, but it also leads to this grungy debris. If it had no EGR system, none of that debris would be there. It doesn't seem to be too much of an issue with American diesels for some reason, like the trucks. And I don't know if it's just because they're larger, bigger breathing engines, but these, we see it on TDI Volkswagens. We see it a lot on the Jeep Liberty. It's an small Italian 4-cylinder diesel. We see it on the Mercedes. But changing the oil and doing regular service is critical to minimizing that. And also highway driving, again, is another thing. A lot of these diesels, people use them just around the city, and that's definitely harder on the system as well, because the engine doesn't get hot and warm enough. I know we've talked about this in the past too. Driving it, getting it good and hot is best for diesel. If you drive highway drives, much better. Incidentally, I do want to mention this vehicle has 273,000 kilometers on it, so it's had some pretty good usage and good life, and that is a good thing. And after the work we've done on it, I mean, it'll be good for quite a lot longer time frame. So even though the oil change was way overdue, and definitely a bad thing, and with all the things that are plugged and blocked, cleaning that all out will get a lot more life out of this engine. So as long as the owner keeps changing his oil at the regular time frame, I don't see why you can get 500,000 or 1 million kilometers out of one of these engines. I mean, they are very good.
So there you go. You need maintenance or repairs on your ML320 3-liter diesel, or any Mercedes, Jeep, VW diesel. These are the guys to see in Vancouver, Pawlik Automotive. They're experts in this stuff. Give them a call, 604-327-7112 to book your appointment, or check out their website. Tons of good information on there, pawlikautomotive.com. Thanks, Bernie.
Thanks, Mark. Talk to you again soon.